Nobody saw it coming, not really. Sure, there were whispers on the news about some weird virus outbreak overseas, but that stuff always stayed over there, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. The night everything went sideways started like any other Thursday evening in Coopersville, Pennsylvania. Jake Martinez was pulling a double shift at Murphy's Gas and Go, scrolling through his phone between customers, when the emergency broadcast system went nuts. Every phone in the store started screaming that awful alarm sound, and Jake nearly dropped his energy drink all over the counter. The message was short and made 0 sense at first: seek shelter immediately. Avoid contact with infected individuals. This is not a drill. Jake looked out the grimy windows at the empty parking lot, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and thought somebody was messing around. Maybe some hacker punks thought they were funny. But then Mrs. Patterson came running in, and she definitely wasn't laughing. The old lady was missing a shoe, her gray hair wild like she'd stuck her finger in a socket, and she was screaming something about her neighbor eating her dog. Not like cooking it for dinner, but straight up chomping on it in the front yard, raw and nasty. Jake figured she'd finally lost it, but then he saw what was chasing her. The thing that stumbled through the automatic doors didn't look like Mr. Patterson anymore, even though it was wearing his world's best grandpa shirt. The dude's eyes were completely white, milky like spoiled cream, and there was dark stuff all over his mouth that definitely wasn't chocolate. Jake's brain couldn't process it fast enough. Mr. Patterson lunged at his wife with this horrible gurgling sound, and Jake did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the counter for robberies and swung for the fences. The bat connected with Mr. Patterson's shoulder and the old man went down, but he didn't stay down. He scrambled back up like pain meant nothing to him, moving all wrong, joints bending ways they shouldn't. Mrs. Patterson was screaming her head off, and Jake pulled her behind the counter just as 2 more of those things stumbled into the store. One was a kid, couldn't have been more than 16, still wearing his Coopersville High Letterman jacket. The other was someone Jake didn't recognize, a woman in a business suit with half her neck missing. That's when reality smacked Jake right in the face. This was actually happening. Whatever these things were, they weren't people anymore, and they wanted to tear him and Mrs. Patterson apart. Jake's hands were shaking so bad he could barely grip the bat, but adrenaline kicked in hard. He'd played baseball all through high school, and muscle memory took over. He swung again, this time aiming for the kid's head, and there was this sickening crunch that made his stomach flip. The kid went down and didn't get back up. Jake wanted to puke, wanted to cry, wanted to wake up from this nightmare, but there wasn't time. The woman in the suit was climbing over the counter, her busted neck flopping around, and Mrs. Patterson was trying to fight her off with a bag of chips. It would have been funny in literally any other situation. Jake pulled Mrs. Patterson back and shoved a display rack at the woman, sending her sprawling into the automotive section. Mr. Patterson was still coming, and there were more shapes moving outside in the parking lot now, shambling toward the light of the store like moths to a flame. "We gotta get out of here," Jake shouted, but Mrs. Patterson was in shock, just standing there shaking. He grabbed her arm and hauled her toward the back room, smacking Mr. Patterson away with the bat as they went. The storage area was cramped and smelled like stale cigarettes and cardboard, but there was a back door that led to the alley. Jake's mind was racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. His mom and little sister were home alone across town. His best friend Derek was probably at his apartment playing video games, completely clueless. Jake had to get to them, had to make sure they were okay, but first he had to get out of this store alive. He pushed Mrs. Patterson toward the exit and grabbed his keys from his jacket. His beat-up Honda was parked right outside, and if they moved fast, they could make it. Jake cracked the back door open and peeked out. The alley was dark and empty, just overflowing dumpsters and broken asphalt. He could hear moaning and shuffling from the front of the store, glass breaking, but nothing back here yet. "Come on," he whispered, and they ran for it. His hands fumbled with the keys, and he was cursing under his breath, finally getting the door unlocked. Mrs. Patterson dove into the passenger seat, and Jake threw himself behind the wheel, cranking the engine. The Honda coughed once, twice, and he was about to scream, but then it turned over and roared to life. Jake peeled out of the alley just as 3 of those things rounded the corner. He didn't look back, just floored it onto Main Street, and that's when he saw the whole town had gone to hell. Cars were crashed everywhere, fires burning in shop windows, and those things were all over the place, chasing down anyone still alive. A man ran past with one of those creatures on his back, both of them disappearing into an alley. A woman was trying to break into a parked car, screaming for help while a whole group of them closed in. Jake wanted to stop, wanted to help, but there were too many and he had his own people to save. He gritted his teeth and kept driving, swerving around abandoned vehicles and bodies in the street. Mrs. Patterson was praying beside him, clutching her seatbelt like it was a lifeline. The drive across town felt like it took forever, even though it was only 10 minutes. Jake's neighborhood looked like a war zone. The Wilsons' house was on fire, the Johnsons' front door was hanging open, and there were those things everywhere, way more than he'd seen downtown. Some were fast, sprinting like athletes, while others shambled slow and clumsy. Jake didn't know which was worse. He skidded to a stop in front of his house, relief flooding through him when he saw the lights on inside. "Stay in the car, lock the doors," he told Mrs. Patterson, but she grabbed his arm. "Don't leave me alone," she begged, and he couldn't blame her. He nodded and they both got out, running for the front door. Jake's key was already in his hand, and he unlocked it in record time, shoving Mrs. Patterson inside before slamming it shut behind them. "Mom! Emma!" he yelled, and his little sister came running from the living room, tears streaming down her 12-year-old face. She crashed into him and he hugged her tight, looking over her head at his mom who appeared in the hallway with a kitchen knife in her hand. "Jake, thank God," Maria Martinez said, lowering the knife. She was a tough lady, raised 3 kids by herself after their dad took off, worked 2 jobs and never complained. But right now she looked scared, really scared. And that shook Jake more than anything else had. What the hell is happening? The news says to stay inside, that it's some kind of virus, but people are saying it's making everyone crazy, making them into monsters, Jake finished. "I've seen them, Mom. They're attacking people, eating them." Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, he stopped, looking at the old woman who'd collapsed on their couch, still shaking. "Mrs. Patterson's okay, but her husband, he turned into one of them. We gotta lock everything down, make sure nothing can get in." His mom nodded, already moving. Maria Martinez didn't freeze up in a crisis, she got to work. "Emma, help me check all the windows. Jake, there's a hammer and nails in the garage. We need to board up the downstairs." They scattered, moving with purpose, and Jake felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe they could ride this out, wait for the military or whoever to fix things. He ran to the garage, grabbing tools and the spare plywood his mom had been meaning to use for a garden project. As he worked, hammering boards across the living room windows, he could hear screaming outside, gunshots in the distance, car alarms going off. The world was tearing itself apart out there. They worked for an hour straight, reinforcing every entry point they could think of. Jake dragged furniture against the doors, and his mom found an old camping stove and started pulling together supplies. Emma was in charge of filling every container they had with water, and Mrs. Patterson eventually snapped out of her shock enough to help inventory their food. They had maybe 2 weeks' worth if they stretched it, assuming the power stayed on and the fridge kept working. Jake tried his phone but the networks were jammed, everyone trying to call everyone else. He couldn't reach Derek, couldn't reach his other sister who was away at college. That helpless feeling was worse than the fear. Around midnight, something started pounding on their front door. The whole house shook with each impact, and they all froze, staring at the door like it might explode inward. Jake gripped his bat and motioned for everyone to get upstairs, but his mom shook her head, grabbing a cast iron skillet from the kitchen. Emma was crying quietly, and Mrs. Patterson was praying again. The pounding continued, relentless and rhythmic, and then they heard a voice. "Hey! Anyone in there? Please, I need help." It sounded human, desperate and scared, but Jake had seen enough horror movies to be suspicious. "How do we know you're not one of them?" Jake shouted through the door. "Because those things don't talk, man. Come on, there's a bunch of them coming down the street, please." The voice was young, male, and terrified. Jake looked at his mom, and she looked at Mrs. Patterson, and finally Emma spoke up. "We have to help him," she said quietly. "We can't just let him die out there." She was right, and Jake knew it, but opening that door could get them all killed. He moved to the window, peeking through a gap in the boards, and saw a skinny black kid, maybe 17 or 18, standing on their porch in a pizza delivery uniform. Behind him, maybe 50 yards down the street, was a crowd of those things, moving their way. The kid was looking over his shoulder, panic written all over his face. Jake made a split-second decision and started dragging furniture away from the door. "Get ready to slam it shut if anything goes wrong," he told his mom, and she nodded, skillet raised. He unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. "Move, now!" The kid didn't need to be told twice. He dove inside and Jake slammed the door behind him, throwing the locks back. Outside, they could hear the moaning getting closer, hands slapping against the boards on their windows. Everyone held their breath, but the boards held, and after a few minutes, the sounds moved on, the horde shuffling past towards some other target. The pizza kid was on the floor, gasping for air, and Jake noticed his name tag said Marcus. He had a backpack on and looked like he'd been through hell, dirt and blood on his uniform, though it didn't look like his blood. "Thank you," Marcus panted. "Thank you so much, I thought I was dead. Those things got my manager, got everybody at the shop. I've been running for hours." "You hurt? You been bitten?" Jake asked, bat still ready. He felt bad being suspicious, but he'd seen how Mr. Patterson turned. Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, no bites. I'm clean, I swear. Check me if you want." He stood up slowly, holding his arms out, and Maria moved forward with a flashlight, checking him over with the careful eye of a mom who'd seen every playground injury imaginable. After a minute, she stepped back and nodded to Jake. "He's okay." She handed Marcus a bottle of water and he chugged half of it in one go. "You got family we need to try to reach?" Marcus's face fell. "Had a mom and little brother across town, but I can't get through on the phone. I was trying to get to them when I saw your lights." The pain in his voice was something they all understood, that awful not knowing. Emma brought him a chair and he sat down heavy, looking like all the adrenaline had just drained out of him at once. They spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, lights off except for a few candles, listening to the chaos outside. The TV still worked and they flipped between news channels, trying to piece together what was happening. The reports were confused and contradictory, but the basic story was the same everywhere. Some kind of virus had spread across the country, maybe the whole world, turning people into aggressive, mindless cannibals. The infected were being called everything from zombies to the rabid to affected individuals, depending on which channel you watched. The government was urging everyone to shelter in place while they worked on a solution, but you could tell from the reporters' faces that nobody had a clue what to do. By morning, the power went out. One minute the TV was showing footage of the National Guard setting up checkpoints, the next everything went dark and quiet. The only sounds were birds chirping outside like nothing was wrong, and the occasional moan or crash somewhere in the neighborhood. Jake went upstairs to his room and looked out the window at the street below. In the daylight, everything looked worse somehow. Bodies lying in yards, cars with doors hanging open, blood on the pavement. The Hendersons' dog was wandering around loose, looking for its owners who were probably dead or worse. Jake saw one of those things stumble out of a garage across the street, and he ducked back automatically even though he was on the second floor. Downstairs, everyone was gathered in the kitchen, taking stock. Without power, the food in the fridge would go bad fast. They had canned goods, some pasta and rice, peanut butter and crackers. Enough for maybe a week and a half if they were careful. Water was the bigger concern. With the electricity out, the pumps might not work, and what they'd collected might be all they'd get. Marcus had some candy bars and a warm 2-liter of Coke in his backpack, which he added to the pile. It wasn't much, but something about pooling resources made Jake feel like they were a team, like they had a chance. "We can't just stay here forever," Maria said, voicing what they were all thinking. "Eventually we'll run out of supplies. And we don't know if Emma's sister is safe, or Marcus's family, or anyone else." She looked around at all of them. "We need more information. We need to find other survivors and figure out a real plan." The emergency broadcast mentioned evacuation centers, Mrs. Patterson offered. "Maybe they've set up somewhere safe, somewhere with food and water and protection." It made sense, but Jake had a bad feeling about going outside, trying to travel anywhere with those things roaming around. Still, what choice did they have? They couldn't wait here until they starved. "There's a fire station about 2 miles from here," Jake said. "They'd have supplies, maybe a radio that still works, and it's a sturdy building. If we could get there, we could find out where these evacuation centers are, see if there's help coming." It wasn't a great plan, but it was a plan, and right now that was something. They spent the next hour getting ready. Jake found his dad's old camping gear in the attic, including a couple of backpacks and a hunting knife that he gave to Marcus. His mom had some mace and took the hammer, while Mrs. Patterson refused to carry anything more than a heavy flashlight, saying she was too old to be fighting monsters. Emma got a baseball bat of her own, a smaller one from when she played Little League, and practiced swinging it until Maria told her to save her energy. They packed light, water bottles, some food, first aid kit, matches, and whatever else they could fit. Jake grabbed a local map from the junk drawer, the old paper kind his mom insisted on keeping even though everyone had GPS, and marked out a route to the fire station that stuck to side streets as much as possible. Before they left, Jake went to his room one more time. He looked at his posters, his gaming setup, his whole life that seemed like it belonged to a different person now. Just yesterday his biggest worry had been whether he'd get enough hours at work to make rent on the apartment he'd been planning to get with Derek. Now he was planning a dangerous journey through a city full of monsters, and he might never come back to this room. He grabbed a picture off his desk, a photo from Emma's birthday last year showing their whole family smiling and happy, and stuffed it in his pocket. Something to remember what they were fighting for. They left through the back door, moving in a tight group with Jake in front and Marcus bringing up the rear. The morning was weirdly beautiful, sun shining and birds singing, completely at odds with the nightmare reality. Jake's backyard opened onto an alley, and they crept along it, trying to stay quiet. Every shadow made them jump, every noise made them freeze. They made it 3 blocks before they saw their first zombie up close in daylight. It was a woman in a bathrobe, standing in the middle of the street like she was waiting for a bus. Her face was gray and slack, her eyes that horrible milky white, and she was swaying slightly, almost like she was asleep on her feet. Jake motioned for everyone to stay still, hoping she wouldn't notice them, but Emma's foot kicked a can and the zombie's head snapped around instantly. For a dead thing, she moved fast, letting out a shriek and charging right at them. Jake didn't have time to think, he just swung his bat and caught her in the chest, knocking her back. She didn't care, scrambling forward on hands and knees, and Marcus jumped in, stabbing down with the hunting knife. It was messy and awful, and when it was over they were all breathing hard, staring at the body. "Keep moving," Maria said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. They hurried on, and the next few blocks were a blur of tension and near misses. They hid behind a dumpster while a group of zombies wandered past. They ran across an intersection where 2 of those things were fighting over something Jake didn't want to look at too closely. They found a little girl, couldn't have been more than 6, standing in a yard crying, and they almost went to help her before they saw her eyes were white and her hands were covered in blood. That one hurt, knowing they couldn't save everyone, knowing some people were already gone even if they were still walking around. The fire station finally came into view, a sturdy brick building with big red doors, and Jake felt a surge of relief. They'd made it, they were actually going to make it. But as they got closer, that relief turned to dread. The doors were hanging open, and there was blood on the concrete driveway. The fire trucks were gone, probably out on calls when everything went bad. Jake signaled for everyone to stop, and they crouched behind a parked car, watching the building for movement. Could be empty, Marcus whispered. Could be safe inside. Could be full of those things, Jake countered. But they'd come this far, and they needed what was inside: supplies, information, maybe even weapons. Okay, we go in quiet, stick together, and if it looks bad we get out fast. Everybody clear? Nods all around, even from Emma, who was trying so hard to be brave. They approached the open doors slowly, and Jake's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. The interior of the fire station was dim and trashed. Chairs knocked over, papers everywhere, a coffee mug shattered on the floor. But no zombies, not that they could see. They moved through the garage area where the truck should have been, and found a door leading to the main building. Jake opened it carefully, and they entered a hallway with offices on one side and a kitchen on the other. The kitchen was their first stop. They found bottles of water, some canned soup and vegetables, granola bars, even a case of sports drinks. It was a gold mine, and they started loading up their bags, spirits lifting a little. That's when they heard the sound from deeper in the building, a rhythmic banging like someone hitting metal. Everyone froze, and Jake had a split second to decide: investigate or grab what they had and run. But what if it was survivors? What if someone was trapped and needed help? He made eye contact with his mom and saw she was thinking the same thing. They couldn't leave people behind, not if they could help. Jake pointed to Marcus and his mom. You two stay here with Emma and Mrs. Patterson. I'll check it out. Not alone you won't, Maria said firmly. She turned to Marcus. Watch them. Anything comes through that door, you yell. Marcus nodded, gripping his knife tighter, and Jake and his mom headed down the hallway toward the sound. It was coming from a door at the end, the kind with a small window, and there was something written on it in what looked like marker: "Don't open." That should have been enough to turn them around, but the banging continued, and now Jake could hear voices, people shouting. He looked through the window and saw 3 firefighters in full gear, pounding on the inside of the door. They looked scared but alive, definitely human, and one of them spotted Jake and started shouting louder. Help us! Let us out! But there was something off. Jake's eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond them and he saw why someone had written that warning. The room was packed with zombies, at least a dozen of them, clawing at the walls and each other in a frenzy. The firefighters weren't trapped in there by accident. Someone had locked them in with those things, maybe hoping the gear would protect them, maybe just out of panic. We can't open that, Maria said quietly. The second we do, all of those things will pour out. But those guys are still alive, Jake argued, even though he knew she was right. We can't just leave them. One of the firefighters heard them talking and pressed against the window. He was a big guy, middle-aged, with terror in his eyes. Please, they keep getting closer. Our gear is tearing. You have to let us out. Behind him, a zombie in a shredded postal uniform lunged, and one of the other firefighters kicked it back. They were fighting hard, but it was only a matter of time. Jake's mind raced. The door opened inward, into the room. If they opened it, zombies would flood out and they'd all die. But maybe there was another way. Is there another exit in there? He shouted through the window. The firefighter looked around desperately and shook his head. Jake cursed. Then he noticed the ceiling. There were acoustic tiles, the kind you could push up. The ceiling. Can you get into the crawl space? The firefighter's eyes widened and he looked up. He nodded frantically and started yelling at the other two. They formed a human pyramid, the big guy on bottom, and the youngest one climbed up, pushing at a ceiling tile. It lifted, and he pulled himself into the dark space above. The other one followed, and then they were trying to pull the big guy up, but he was heavy and the zombies were right there, grabbing at his legs. Jake made another split-second decision. "Mom, get back to the others, get ready to run." "Jake, no. Just do it." He waited until she was halfway down the hall, then he took a deep breath and unlocked the door. He didn't open it, just turned the lock, and that was enough. The zombies must have heard the click because they went nuts, pushing against it. The firefighters gave one last desperate heave and hauled their buddy into the ceiling just as Jake turned and ran. Behind him, the door burst open and zombies spilled into the hallway, shrieking and moaning. Jake didn't look back, he just sprinted for the kitchen where everyone was waiting. "Go, go, go," he yelled, and they grabbed what they could and ran for the exit. Behind them, the horde was coming, a wave of death flooding through the building. They burst out into the sunshine and kept running, not stopping until they were 2 blocks away, lungs burning and legs aching. Jake finally let himself look back and saw zombies pouring out of the fire station, spreading into the streets. But they'd also bought those firefighters a chance. If they could navigate the ceiling crawlspace to another part of the building, they might make it out alive. "That was insane," Marcus gasped, bent over with his hands on his knees. "That was absolutely freaking insane." "Did we get anything?" Emma asked, and they checked their bags. They'd managed to grab a good amount of supplies, enough to make the risk worth it, barely. Maria looked at her son with a mix of pride and frustration. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she said, but she pulled him into a quick hug. They didn't have time for more because those zombies were starting to spread out, and some were heading their direction. The group moved quickly, cutting through yards and alleys, trying to put distance between them and the fire station. They'd gone maybe half a mile when they heard an engine, and a battered pickup truck came tearing around the corner with zombies chasing it. The truck skidded to a stop and a woman leaned out the window. "Get in if you want to live," she shouted. She was maybe 30, with short red hair and a shotgun resting on the dashboard. The truck bed already had 2 people in it, an older Hispanic guy and a teenage Asian girl. Jake didn't hesitate, he started helping everyone climb into the bed, then jumped in himself just as the first zombie reached them. The woman floored it, and they went flying through the streets, wind whipping past, putting blessed distance between them and danger. The woman drove like she was in an action movie, swerving around obstacles, taking corners fast enough to make them all hang on for dear life. Finally, she pulled into a parking garage and killed the engine on the 3rd floor, far from any street access. Everyone climbed out shaky and disoriented. "Name's Kelly," the woman said, hopping out of the cab. "That's Carlos and May in the back with you. We've been driving around looking for survivors. You folks okay? Anyone bitten?" They all shook their heads, and Jake introduced his group. Carlos was a construction worker who'd been on a job site when things went bad, and May was a high school student who'd escaped from her school after her whole chemistry class turned. They were shell-shocked but alive, and they'd been with Kelly for a few hours now, trying to figure out a plan. "There's rumors of a safe zone," Kelly explained, pulling out a rumpled piece of paper. "Someone spray-painted coordinates on a wall downtown. Supposed to be a shopping mall that's been fortified, got supplies and people working together. It's about 5 miles from here." "A mall could work," Carlos said in a gravelly voice. "Multiple exits, lots of storage, high fences around the parking lot. If people organized quick enough, they could make it defensible." It made sense, way more sense than trying to hide in houses and apartments scattered across the city. Strength in numbers, real walls and resources. Jake looked at his mom and saw her nodding. "We should try for it," Maria said. "We can't keep running forever. We need somewhere to ford up, and we need to find more people. Emma's sister, Marcus's family, whoever else made it. A central location where survivors can gather." They all agreed, and Kelly checked her gas gauge, frowning. "We got maybe enough to get there, but it's gonna be close." And we'll have to go through downtown, which is gonna be crawling with those things. She looked at all of them, at the tired faces and scared eyes. I won't lie to you, this is dangerous. But staying here is dangerous too. Everything's dangerous now. At least at the mall we got a shot at something better. They loaded back into the truck, squeezing everyone in as best they could, and Kelly started the engine again. The drive downtown was a nightmare. The streets were completely clogged with abandoned cars, forcing Kelly to drive on sidewalks and through parks. They saw groups of zombies everywhere, sometimes just a few wandering aimlessly, sometimes massive hordes that they had to detour around. They saw other survivors too, people on rooftops waving for help, a family trapped in a second-story window, a guy on a motorcycle weaving through traffic with zombies in pursuit. Each time, Jake wanted to stop, wanted to help, but Kelly kept driving. We can't save everyone right now, she said grimly. We gotta save ourselves first, then we can come back with more people, more supplies. The mall finally appeared ahead, a massive structure surrounded by a huge parking lot. And Kelly was right, someone had been busy. The parking lot entrances were blocked with overturned trucks and concrete barriers, and there were people with guns standing on top of the barricades, watching for threats. As Kelly's truck approached, several of those guards aimed weapons their way, and she slowed down, hanging out the window with her hands visible. We're human. We're looking for shelter, she yelled. There was a tense moment where Jake thought they might just shoot them anyway, but then one of the guards, a black woman in military fatigues, waved them forward. Park it and come through the checkpoint on foot. Any weapons you got, keep them pointed down. They did as they were told, parking the truck and walking toward a gap in the barricade that had been left open. As they got closer, Jake could see the setup was pretty sophisticated. The barriers were layered so nothing could just charge through, and there were people stationed at multiple points with rifles and makeshift spears. The woman in fatigues met them at the checkpoint with two other guards, a young white guy with a hunting rifle and an older Korean man with a crossbow. Names and status, the woman said curtly. Her name tag read Lieutenant Brooks. Kelly did the talking, introducing everyone and explaining they'd been on the run since last night. Brooks listened carefully, then had each of them show their arms, checking for bites. When she was satisfied they were clean, her expression softened slightly. Welcome to Fort Haven, I guess that's what we're calling it now. We got maybe 200 people inside, more showing up every hour. It's organized chaos in there, but it's safe, or as safe as anywhere can be right now. They were led through the barricade and across the parking lot to the mall's main entrance. The glass doors had been reinforced with metal grating, and more guards stood watch inside. As they entered the mall proper, Jake was amazed at what he saw. The place had been transformed into a makeshift fortress and refugee camp. The stores were being used for different purposes. One was a medical station where people with injuries were being treated, another was food storage, another was sleeping quarters with blankets and pillows laid out. The central atrium had become a command center, with tables set up and people coordinating activities, assigning tasks, making lists of who was here and who was still missing. There were families with kids, elderly people, teenagers, people from every walk of life all working together. Some were reinforcing barricades, some were cooking food on camp stoves, some were just sitting in shock trying to process everything. It was loud and messy, but there was an energy of determination, of people refusing to just lay down and die. Lieutenant Brooks led them to the command center and introduced them to a man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. This is Mayor Richards, he's been coordinating things since the power went out. Richards shook hands with all of them, and Jake realized this was their actual town mayor, the guy whose face was on billboards every election. Glad you made it, Richards said warmly. We're putting together teams, supply runs, defense, medical, communications. We're trying to contact other safe zones, figure out how widespread this is. The internet's down and cell service is spotty, but we've got some ham radios working. Military's spread thin but they're trying to contain things, set up evacuation routes to FEMA camps outside the city. So there's a plan? Maria asked hopefully. There's help coming? Richards hesitated. There's effort being made. Whether it's enough, we'll see. Right now, our best bet is to hold this position, gather as many survivors as we can, and wait for things to stabilize. These creatures, whatever they are, they're not smart. They're driven by hunger and rage, but they don't plan, don't use tools. We can outsmart them if we work together. Over the next few hours, Jake and his group got integrated into Fort Haven. Emma and Mrs. Patterson were assigned to the medical area where they could help organize supplies and comfort people. Marcus volunteered for defense, wanting to learn how to really fight. Maria joined the food distribution team, using her experience managing resources on a tight budget. Kelly and Carlos both went to the engineering crew that was reinforcing the mall's structure and planning expansions. Jake ended up on a supply run team led by a former Marine named Travis who'd taken charge of offensive operations. We go out twice a day, Travis explained to the new recruits. He was a barrel-chested guy with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense attitude. Morning and evening, hit pharmacies, grocery stores, hardware shops, anywhere with useful stuff. We move fast, we move quiet, and we don't take stupid risks. I've lost good people to stupid risks. He looked at all of them hard, making sure they understood. You follow my orders exactly, and maybe we all come home. You go cowboy, you'll get yourself and your team killed. Clear? Everyone nodded, and Jake felt the weight of what he'd signed up for. This wasn't like saving those firefighters on impulse, this was calculated, planned danger. But they needed supplies, and he was young and strong and capable. He could do this. The team consisted of Travis, Jake, a tough-looking woman named Dion who'd been a cop, and two brothers, Tommy and Ray, who'd survived together since the start. They spent the evening planning a route to a pharmacy and a sporting goods store, marking it on a map and discussing contingencies. That night, Jake lay on a blanket in the sleeping area, surrounded by hundreds of other people trying to rest, and thought about how much had changed in 24 hours. Yesterday he'd been a gas station employee with normal problems. Today he was a survivor in a zombie apocalypse, sleeping in a mall, preparing to risk his life on supply runs. He thought about the people he'd seen die, the little girl with white eyes, the firefighters maybe dying in that ceiling. He thought about his sister away at college, was she safe? Had she found somewhere like this? The not knowing was agony, but all he could do was survive another day and hope she was doing the same. He must have dozed off because suddenly someone was shaking him awake. It was barely dawn, and Travis was standing there. Suit up, we roll out in 10. Jake scrambled to his feet, grabbing his bat and the backpack they'd given him. The rest of the team was gathering near the entrance, checking weapons and gear. Lieutenant Brooks handed each of them a walkie-talkie. Check in every 15 minutes, she instructed. You miss a check-in, we assume you're in trouble and you're on your own. We can't risk a rescue operation for every team that goes dark. They headed out into the gray early morning, the city eerily quiet except for the occasional moan in the distance. A vehicle would draw too much attention, so they were going on foot, moving through back alleys and side streets. The pharmacy was only a mile away, but it took them 40 minutes of careful navigation to get there. They encountered small groups of zombies, but Travis had taught them how to move silently, how to distract and evade rather than fight when possible. Fighting made noise, noise drew more of them, and before you knew it you were surrounded. The pharmacy's windows were broken, and the place had been looted, but Travis led them past the front counter to the actual pharmacy area and back. Those good drugs were behind a cage, and most looters hadn't gotten through it. Tommy, who'd been a locksmith before all this, made quick work of it, and they found bottles and bottles of antibiotics, painkillers, insulin, all the stuff people at Fort Haven desperately needed. They loaded up quickly and efficiently, and Jake felt a surge of pride. They were doing it, making a difference. The sporting goods store was dicier. It was in a more open area, and there were zombies visible on the streets around it. But they needed weapons, needed protective gear, needed equipment that could only be found there. Travis counted the visible threats, 8 zombies, spread out. Okay, here's how we play it. Dion and I will draw them off to the east. You 3 get inside, grab what's on the list, and get out. We'll loop back and meet you at the rally point in 20 minutes. Do not wait for us, do not come looking for us. You get the supplies back to base. Understood? It was understood, even if Jake didn't like it. Travis and Dion jogged off, then started shouting and banging on dumpsters. The zombies' heads snapped toward the noise and they took off shambling and running in that direction. Jake, Tommy, and Ray sprinted for the store's side entrance, Tommy picking that lock too. Inside, the store was dark and creepy, full of shadows and overturned displays. They had flashlights but didn't want to use them too much, didn't want to draw attention. They split the list. Ray went for camping gear, Tommy for knives and tools, Jake for bats, bows, anything weapon-like. Jake was loading aluminum bats into his pack when he heard a sound behind him, a low growl. He spun around and saw a zombie in a security uniform, must have been trapped in here since the start. It lunged and Jake swung his bat on pure instinct, connecting with its head. The zombie went down but Jake's bat clattered away across the floor, making way too much noise. He froze, listening, and heard more growling, from multiple directions. The store wasn't empty. "Guys, we got company," he hissed into his walkie-talkie. Tommy and Ray's voices crackled back, they were dealing with the same problem. The store had zombies inside, probably employees and shoppers who'd been here when it started. Jake grabbed another bat off the shelf and started backing toward the exit, but more of them were appearing, cutting him off. His heart was pounding, and he was trying to remember Travis's training: stay calm, look for exits, don't let them surround you. He spotted a ladder going up to an office area and climbed fast, pulling himself onto a catwalk that ran along the wall. Below, zombies were gathering, reaching up for him uselessly. He could see Tommy and Ray across the store on the ground level, back to back, fighting off 4 or 5 of those things. Jake looked around desperately for a way to help and saw a kayak hanging from the ceiling display. An idea hit him, probably a stupid one, but he didn't have many options. He crawled across the catwalk to where the kayak was suspended, found the cable holding it, and started sawing at it with his pocket knife. It took forever, precious seconds, while Tommy and Ray were getting overwhelmed, but finally the cable snapped. The kayak plummeted down and crashed into the group of zombies, scattering them and knocking several down. It gave the brothers the opening they needed to run for the exit, and Jake scrambled down the ladder, grabbing his pack and following. They burst out of the store into daylight, and Travis and Dion were already at the rally point, looking worried. When they saw the 3 of them running up, relief crossed Travis's face. "What the hell happened?" "Store was full of them," Ray gasped. "More than we could handle." Travis cursed but didn't waste time on recriminations. They moved quickly back toward the mall, taking a different route in case they'd picked up a tail. Jake's hands were shaking from the adrenaline dump, but they'd made it, they'd gotten supplies and everyone was alive. That was a win in this new world. Back at Fort Haven, they unloaded their haul and it was received with cheers and gratitude. The medical team especially was thrilled with the pharmacy supplies. Mayor Richards personally thanked each of them, and Jake felt like maybe he'd found his purpose in all this chaos. That night, there was an actual meal. Someone had figured out how to use the mall's food court grills with propane tanks, and they cooked up a huge batch of burgers and hot dogs from the frozen food stores. It wasn't fancy but it was hot and there was enough for everyone, and the mood in the mall lifted considerably. After dinner, there was a meeting in the atrium where Mayor Richards addressed everyone. "We've made contact with 2 other safe zones in the region," he announced. One at the university, one at the Riverside Industrial Complex. Between the 3 locations, we're housing almost 1,000 survivors. The military is establishing a perimeter around the city, and they say within a week they'll begin evacuating civilians to quarantine camps where we can be processed and relocated. It's not over, but we're surviving. We're fighting back. And as long as we stand together, we've got a chance. People applauded, and Jake saw hope on faces that had been nothing but fear yesterday. Emma found him in the crowd and hugged him tight. "You did good today," she said. "You're like a superhero now." He laughed and ruffled her hair, feeling older than his years but also grateful. They were alive, they were together, and they'd found something worth protecting, a community, fragile and makeshift, but real. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Supply runs in the morning, fortification work in the afternoon, communal meals in the evening. More survivors trickled in, and Fort Haven grew to nearly 500 people. They lost some too, a supply team that didn't come back, an elderly man whose heart gave out, a woman who'd hidden a bite and turned in the middle of the night before anyone realized. Each loss hurt, but they mourned together and kept going. Jake went on dozens of runs, got better at fighting, better at staying calm under pressure. Marcus found his mom and brother at the university safe zone during a supply exchange, and the reunion made everyone cry happy tears. Mrs. Patterson started teaching kids in a makeshift school, giving them some sense of normalcy. Kelly and Carlos worked miracles with the mall's infrastructure, getting a generator running and even rigging up some solar panels from a hardware store. They got lights in the medical area and the command center, which made everything feel a little less desperate. Maria became the go-to person for resolving disputes and organizing work schedules, her natural leadership shining through. Lieutenant Brooks trained anyone who wanted to learn how to fight, and the mall's defense force grew to nearly 50 capable fighters. 2 weeks after the world ended, the military trucks arrived. Convoys of soldiers in hazmat suits and armored vehicles, coming to escort survivors to the quarantine camps. There was debate about whether to trust them, whether the camps would be safe or just another kind of prison, but Mayor Richards made the call. "We can't sustain this forever," he said. "We need real resources, real infrastructure. I know it's scary to leave what we've built, but this was always temporary. It's time to take the next step." They loaded up in waves, families staying together, the mall slowly emptying out. Jake and his family were in one of the last groups, and he took one final look at Fort Haven before climbing into the truck. This place had saved their lives, had been their home when the world fell apart. The soldiers were professional but distant, not answering many questions, just directing people where to go. The ride to the camp took hours, winding through countryside that looked untouched by the chaos, fields and forests like the apocalypse had never happened. The quarantine camp was a sprawling tent city surrounded by high fences and guard towers, housing thousands of people from across the region. It was crowded and uncomfortable, but there was food, clean water, medical care. Scientists were working on understanding the virus, soldiers were clearing out infected zones, and there was talk of rebuilding, of taking back their cities and their lives. It would be a long road, Jake knew, maybe years before things were anywhere close to normal. But humanity had survived the first terrible wave, and that was something. Sitting in the tent with his mom and Emma, Marcus and Mrs. Patterson having found space nearby, Jake thought about that first night when he'd fought Mr. Patterson in the gas station. He'd been terrified, convinced they were all going to die. But they hadn't died. They'd fought, they'd adapted, they'd found others and built something together. The world had changed overnight, turned into a nightmare of undead horrors and constant danger. But humans had changed too, had found strength they didn't know they possessed, had unified against an enemy that didn't care about borders or differences or any of the petty things that used to divide them. The unknown had tried to destroy them, but it had also revealed what they were capable of when they stood together. And that, Jake figured, was how they'd win in the end. Not through superior firepower or lucky breaks, but through stubborn, determined, unified humanity refusing to give up. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they'd proven they could survive it. They'd proven that when the world fell apart, people could hold each other together. That was worth fighting for. That was worth surviving for. And so they would, one day at a time, until the world was theirs again.